This is the guilty plea problem. And what we're going to be looking at in here is the fact that the US does have a problem with people pleading guilty to crimes that they have not indeed committed. And then we're going to listen to Judge Jed Rackoff actually talking about it. But innocent people are pleading guilty to crimes they did not commit. It happens to countless people each year, and there's no telling how many are behind bars as a result. When most people learn that a person pleaded guilty to a crime, they believe the person must have done it. Yet the number of wrongful convictions exposed over the last 25 years has proven that reasoning to often be unsubstantiated. In fact, nearly 11% of the nation's 362 DNA-based exonerations since 1989 involved people who pleaded guilty to serious crimes they didn't commit. Furthermore, according to the National Registry of Exonerations, 18% of known exonerees pleaded guilty. While it's hard to believe that the United States criminal justice system could be so deeply flawed that innocent people are convicted of crimes they didn't commit, it's even harder to fathom that some of these innocent people actually felt compelled to plead guilty, often in exchange for a reduced sentence or to avoid the death penalty. When so many innocent people are agreeing to their own wrongful convictions, it's time to acknowledge that something is very wrong. The plea system is not a bargain, it is a problem that has no regard for innocence. The guilty plea problem doesn't occur just at the front end of the system. It also happens after people have taken the extraordinary step of demonstrating through solid evidence and often decades in prison that they were in fact innocent. People who have spent years fighting to both prove their innocence and to go home are faced with yet another impossible choice: go home immediately or much sooner without being exonerated, or take the risk of being reconvicted at trial. Instead of vacating their convictions on the basis of innocence, the prosecution offers the wrongly convicted a deal. Plead guilty, have your sentence reduced, and go home. In some cases, the plea allows the defendant to still say they are innocent even while pleading guilty. Regardless, the system fails because it places resolving cases through pleas over uncovering the truth. It also denies wrongly convicted people the justice they deserve and burdens them with a criminal record and the severe collateral consequences that follow, including being denied jobs, housing, the ability to spend time with their children, and the right to vote, as well as a lack of compensation for years wrongly served in jail. So this is basically saying, it's got to the point now where the process isn't about finding out what actually happened. It's just about ticking a box and getting the case closed. Do you know what I mean? And they're shown countless times that they are willing to do that. They are willing to just tick the box and say, this is done. Thank you very much, Deb. Thank you very much. We are all entitled to a criminal justice system that is fair, just, and that adheres to the Constitution's promise of a fair trial, and yet we live in a broken system that no one deserves. Prosecutors who threaten scared youth with harsh sentences, including the death penalty, incentives that make taking pleas over trial the most rational choice, overburdened and under-resourced public defense systems that can't provide adequate representation, and judges who fail to serve as a check on the truth and justice. To make matters worse, there's little incentive for challenging the status quo because ultimately plea deals keep an overburdened and dysfunctional system moving along. If every person charged with a crime demanded a trial, the system would be brought to a halt within a matter of hours. Sadly, our system relies on plea bargains. Money. This is money again, isn't it? How much was the trial and how much was the mechanics of the trial going to cost? There are no easy solutions to fixing this problem, but for the sake of the many innocent people trapped by a broken system, we must do something. The Innocence Project and 56 members of the Innocence Network across the country are committed to raising awareness about the over-reliance on guilty pleas at every stage of the system. But change only comes when the public demands it. And that just goes on to say, we invite you to join our campaign to fix America's guilty plea problem. Help us spread the word about this injustice, and know that we will call on you when we need you to contact your lawmakers and demand change. We all need to work together to protect the innocent who are trapped in an overwhelmed and broken system. Right, so let's go on here. This is what we want to look at now. So this is US District Judge Jed S. Rackoff, and he's going to talk about America's guilty plea problem. I will have to periodically, obviously, stop it and offer commentary over the top, or we'll get struck down with furious anger. So listen to this.
In reaction to the then rising crime rates, Congress and the states imposed all sorts of very
Thank you, Dorothy.
Severe penalties, mandatory minimums of 5, 10, 15, 20, in some cases even more years. And for these and other reasons, as these laws came into place, there was a tremendous penalty attached to going to trial. You would get a much more severe sentence if you went to trial than if you pled guilty, particularly if you could negotiate a plea to a lesser offense or something of that sort. And the statistics are really quite striking. Starting in the mid-'80s.
So they're basically saying it's always been obviously this thing that is just plead out. Let's save some money, and if you allow us to save some money, we'll knock some off you. So that's what it was originally. That's what it was about, wasn't it? Trying to save some money. What happens if the real perps are revealed? Lord knows, Tony. Lord knows. Let's go here.
And continuing to right down to the present, instead of 15 to 20% of all cases all criminal cases going to trial, it quickly declined to something like 3%.
3%.
And that's where it remains to this day. And a certain portion of that are people who are actually factually innocent, who decide to plead guilty because they simply can't take the risk that if they go to trial and are convicted, they will be facing 10, 15, 20 or more years with devastating effects on themselves and their families. And so they prefer, even though they're innocent, to take a plea that might result in a prison term of 1 or 2 or even 5 years, rather than assume the risk. This is not a speculation. This is a proven fact.
So again, this is a proven fact. This is a judge literally talking about the fact that people will admit to or admit to a crime that they didn't commit, or they will plead guilty in order to take a lesser a lesser risk to them. But listen to this. This carries on.
And the Innocence Project has provided part of the proof of the more than 300 people who the Innocence Project has shown were factually innocent, and whose convictions, often of the most serious crimes, were shown to be erroneous and led to their exoneration. Of those, approximately 10% had actually pled guilty to things like homicide, pled guilty to things like rape, even though they had not committed those crimes, and it was later proven definitively that they had not committed those crimes. But they couldn't take the chance of facing the death penalty or life imprisonment or otherwise very severe sentences if they went to trial and they lost. So.
And it's like what I said, isn't it? It's like what I said. There's a massive death as a motivator. Death is a huge motivator. It's all right for people to say, "Oh, nobody's going to plead guilty to a crime that they didn't commit," but Do you know what I mean? It's like, can you imagine being in a position where you are potentially being told, "Look, I don't know what to tell you. We're going to go to trial. I'm not prepared for this." And I touched on this the other day. When you turn around and say, the worst case scenario is, mate, is you get found guilty and you have to face a death penalty. That's just as simple as that. Do you know what I mean? And what would that put your family through? Do you know what I mean? It's a difficult one. And look, I'm not sitting here to turn around and say Bryan Kohberger is innocent. I've got no doubt in my mind that Bryan Kohberger is innocent. What I'm saying is, we've got to a point where he's admitted to this crime, and we've still got a situation where the questions that existed before this still exist. And do you know what I mean? Those questions don't vanish; they don't disappear. The fact that Bryan Kohberger turns around and says, "Yeah, I'm guilty. Yes, guilty, 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 all the way through." It's proven just in this short here by Judge Jed. Do you know what I mean? I just don't know. Do you know what I mean? I don't. People will plead guilty, and I get that some people feel that he's guilty, and I don't blame why you think that he's guilty, because there's so many things that have been pushed out there that are incomplete, but when they're left incomplete, they do point to guilt. The needle is moved, but the point being, we've not had any ability to see the other side of the argument, because that's been taken away now. And this has been going on since the very beginning, from the very, very start, when he should have had a preliminary hearing. That was taken away. Goes to a grand jury. We hear that the grand jury aren't even 100% sure, but lo and behold, fast forward to literally weeks before the trial, and it's a case of, yeah, we're not going to trial anymore. Bryan Kohberger's all of a sudden just pled guilty.